Chapter 1. Saturday Ritual. Greg Jackson had a system. Systems kept life from spinning out of control, and after his ex-wife walked out 3 years ago, control was the only thing standing between him and chaos. Every Saturday at noon, like clockwork, he and JJ came to the park. Same bench, same playground, same chess table under the old oak tree. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. Greg adjusted the strap of his son's backpack and scanned the playground. JJ was already halfway up the jungle gym, his tiny sneakers gripping the metal bars like a seasoned climber. "Dad, watch this," JJ shouted, his voice carrying across the park like a trumpet blast. Greg smiled, shading his eyes with one hand. "I'm watching, buddy. Just don't break any bones. Okay?" JJ grinned, then launched himself down the slide with the kind of reckless joy only 5-year-olds possessed. Greg's heart did its usual lurch, but the kid landed in a heap of giggles and popped up like nothing happened. Greg exhaled. One crisis averted. He turned toward the chess tables, where Arthur sat waiting, as he always did. The old man wore his signature felt fedora and that well-worn sweater Greg suspected had seen more decades than he had. Arthur's white whiskers framed his face like a winter halo, and his eyes twinkled with the kind of mischief that made Greg wonder if Santa Claus had a side hustle playing chess in city parks. "You're late," Arthur said, moving a pawn without preamble. Greg chuckled, sliding into the seat across from him. "I'm 2 minutes late. That's not late. That's fashionably punctual." Arthur snorted. "Fashionable? Son, you're wearing jeans older than your kid." Greg glanced down at his faded denim and shrugged. "They're broken in. Comfortable. Comfortable is what people say when they've given up," Arthur said, eyes dancing as he advanced another pawn. Greg grinned. "You're feisty today." "I'm always feisty. Keeps the blood moving." Arthur leaned back, studying the board like it held the secrets of the universe. "Your move." Greg reached for his knight, but his gaze drifted back to the playground. JJ was now negotiating a trade with another kid, his last fruit snack for a turn on the swing. Greg shook his head. The kid was 5 and already bartering like a Wall Street broker. "You worry too much," Arthur said, following Greg's line of sight. "Comes with the job description," Greg replied, moving his knight. "Single dad. Full-time worrier." Arthur's expression softened. "You're doing fine, Greg. Better than fine." Greg didn't answer. Compliments made him uncomfortable, like shoes that pinched. He focused on the board instead, plotting his next move. For a few minutes, silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant squeals of children and the rhythmic creak of swings. Then JJ came barreling over, cheeks flushed, hair sticking up like he'd wrestled a tornado. "Dad!" He slammed his hands on the table, sending a pawn skittering. "Guess what?" Greg steadied the piece. "What?" "I climbed all the way to the top, like a superhero." JJ puffed out his chest, then frowned at the board. "Are you losing again?" Greg shot Arthur a look. "Define losing." Arthur smirked. "He's losing." JJ giggled. "You always lose, Dad." Greg ruffled his son's hair. "I let him win. It's called good sportsmanship." Arthur raised a snowy brow. "It's called denial." JJ climbed onto Greg's lap, peering at the board with exaggerated seriousness. "You should move that horsey thing." Greg chuckled. "Knight. It's called a knight." "Horsey," JJ insisted, then turned to Arthur. "Do you have a horsey?" Arthur winked. "I've got 2. And they're about to stomp your dad's army." JJ gasped. "Dad, don't let him stomp you." Greg laughed, hugging his son close. "I'll do my best, buddy." JJ wriggled free and dashed back to the playground, leaving Greg with the faint scent of fruit snacks and grass. Arthur watched him go, then said quietly, "He's a good kid." Greg nodded. "Yeah. He's my whole world." Arthur studied him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then he smiled, the mischief returning like sunlight after a cloud. "You ever think about dating again?" Arthur asked casually, as if he were asking about the weather. Greg froze mid-move. "Dating?" Arthur shrugged. "You know, romancy, candlelight, all that jazz." Greg barked a laugh. "Not in this lifetime." "Why not?" Greg set his piece down with a little more force than necessary. "Because I've got a 5-year-old who needs me. Because I've done the whole marriage thing and it blew up in my face. Because," he stopped, jaw tightening. "Because it's not in the cards." Arthur tilted his head. "Funny thing about cards. Sometimes the dealer surprises you." Greg gave him a look. "This isn't poker, Arthur. It's chess." Arthur's grin widened. "Exactly. And in chess, the right move can change everything." Greg shook his head, chuckling as he focused on the board. But Arthur's words lingered, curling in the back of his mind like smoke. Chapter 2. Arthur's secret agenda. Arthur Whitmore believed in 2 things: good coffee and good people. The first was easy to find. The second, rare as hen's teeth. He stirred his cup slowly, watching the steam curl like smoke signals. Across the park, Greg was laughing at something his boy had said, head thrown back, eyes crinkling at the corners. Arthur felt that familiar tug in his chest, the one that reminded him why he came here every Saturday instead of sipping espresso in his penthouse. Greg was a good man, solid, the kind who showed up when life got messy and stayed until the mess was cleaned up. Arthur had seen plenty of men run when the storm hit. Greg, he planted his feet and held the line. Arthur's gaze drifted to JJ, now attempting to convince a group of kids that he was the captain of the swings. The boy had his father's stubborn streak and his mother's smile, though Arthur doubted Greg ever said that out loud. He sighed, leaning back against the bench. 3 years Greg had been doing this alone. 3 years of putting his own life on hold because his ex decided ambition tasted sweeter than family. Arthur didn't judge, well, maybe a little, but mostly he admired Greg's grit. And that was the problem. Grit like that deserved more than loneliness. Arthur tapped his fingers against the chessboard, mind whirring like a well-oiled machine. He'd been chewing on an idea for weeks, and today, it finally crystallized. Greg needed someone, not just anyone, a woman who understood responsibility, who wouldn't crumble when life threw curveballs. Someone strong enough to match him move for move. Arthur smiled slowly. He knew just the person. Meagan, his granddaughter. If Greg was steel, Meagan was tempered glass. Tough, elegant, and sharp enough to cut through nonsense. She worked like a woman possessed, running projects that made Arthur's head spin. Most men she dated couldn't handle it. They wanted her to drop everything and play house. Meagan didn't bend like that. But Greg wouldn't ask her to. He'd respect her drive because he had his own. And if Arthur had learned anything in 82 years, it was this. Two people who respect each other's battles make the best allies. He chuckled under his breath. Allies. That sounded like war talk. Maybe love was a kind of war. Strategy, sacrifice, and the occasional sneak attack. Arthur's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, squinting at the screen. Megan's name flashed in bold letters. Speak of the devil. He answered with a grin. Meggie, to what do I owe the pleasure? Her voice came crisp and efficient, like a well-tuned engine. Granddad, you called me yesterday about some favor? Something at the park. Arthur feigned innocence. Did I? My memory's not what it used to be. Aha. Her tone said she wasn't buying it. You said something about a community project? Ah, yes. Arthur slapped the table, startling a pigeon. The chess pavilion. Poor thing's falling apart. Needs a little love. Megan sighed. And you want me to what? Write a check. Arthur clucked his tongue. Money's easy. I want you to show up. Get your hands dirty. Remind yourself what fresh air feels like. Granddad. No arguments, Arthur said, voice firm but warm. You work too hard. A day in the park will do you good. Silence hummed on the line. Then Megan said, fine, one day. But if this turns into a social ambush. Arthur grinned like a fox. Ambush? Me? Perish the thought. She snorted. You're a terrible liar. Arthur chuckled, ending the call. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and stared at the chessboard. A slow smile spreading across his face. Checkmate was coming. And not just on the board. Chapter 3 Megan's World. Megan Whitmore's office was a glass box perched 30 floors above the city. A gleaming monument to deadlines and ambition. From here, she could see everything. The skyline, the river, the endless stream of cars crawling like ants below. What she couldn't see was a life outside work. Her phone buzzed for the third time in 10 minutes. She didn't look up. Fingers flew across the keyboard. Eyes locked on the spreadsheet glowing like a neon headache. Megan, a voice floated from the doorway. It was Claire, her assistant, clutching a stack of folders like they were life preservers. The client call moved up. 10 minutes. Megan nodded without breaking stride. Send me the deck. Claire hesitated. You've been here since 6. You should eat something. Megan waved her off. Food slows me down. Claire muttered something about human beings needing calories, and vanished. Megan barely heard her. She was already knee-deep in numbers, chasing perfection like it owed her money. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she glanced at the screen, and froze. Granddad. Megan sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Arthur Whitmore was the only person alive who could derail her day with a single call. She swiped to answer. Meggie. His voice boomed through the speaker, warm and mischievous. How's my favorite workaholic? Megan smiled despite herself. Granddad, I'm in the middle of conquering the corporate world. Yes, yes. But listen, I need a favor. Megan groaned softly. What kind of favor? The fun kind, Arthur said, which immediately made her suspicious. There's a little project at the park. Chess pavilion restoration. Needs some hands-on help. Megan blinked. You want me to what? Paint benches. Exactly. Fresh air, sunshine, good honest work. Megan laughed, short and incredulous. Granddad, I haven't held a paintbrush since kindergarten. Then you're overdue. She rubbed her temple. Why me? You have a dozen friends who'd love to play handyman. Arthur's tone softened. Because you need a break, Meggie. You've been running so hard you're gonna burn out. Megan stared at the city beyond the glass. the endless grind reflected in every steel beam. Burnout wasn't a word she liked. It sounded like failure. "One day," she said finally. "That's all I can give." Arthur chuckled. "One day's all I need." Meagan narrowed her eyes. "If this turns into some kind of social ambush." "Ambush? Me?" Perished the thought. She snorted. "You're a terrible liar." Arthur laughed, and for a moment, the weight on her shoulders eased. When the call ended, Meagan leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. Park project. Manual labor. It sounded ridiculous. Sounded oddly tempting. She shook her head, grabbing her phone to check her calendar. Saturday was clear miraculously. "Fine," she muttered to herself. "One day, then back to reality." But as she turned back to her screen, a strange feeling lingered, like the first move in a game she didn't know she was playing. Chapter 4. The setup. Greg Jackson didn't trust Arthur's smile. It wasn't the usual warm, grandfatherly grin that came with a good chess move or a story about the old days. No, this was different, wider, sharper, like a cat who just swallowed a canary and was eyeing the next one. Greg narrowed his eyes across the chessboard. "What's with the look?" Arthur feigned innocence, moving his bishop with exaggerated grace. "What look?" "That look," Greg said, pointing. "The one that says you're about to rope me into something." Arthur chuckled, leaning back on the bench. "You wound me, son." "Can't an old man smile without suspicion?" "Not when that old man is you," Greg muttered, sliding his knight forward. "Spill it." Arthur steepled his fingers, eyes twinkling. "How do you feel about community service?" Greg froze mid-move. "Community service? What did you do?" Arthur barked a laugh. "Not me, you. There's a project at the park restoring the old chess pavilion. Poor thing's falling apart. Needs a little love." Greg frowned. "Isn't that the city's job?" Arthur shrugged. "City's slow, bureaucracy and all that jazz. But if a few good folks step up, we can have it looking sharp in no time." Greg eyed him warily. "And by a few good folks, you mean me?" Arthur grinned. "You catch on quick." Greg sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Arthur, I've got a job, a kid, and about 12 hours of sleep debt. I'm not exactly Mr. Volunteer." Arthur leaned forward, voice dropping to that conspiratorial tone Greg had learned to fear. "Greg, you've been coming here every Saturday for 3 years. This park is practically your second home. Wouldn't it be nice to give something back?" Greg opened his mouth to argue, but then JJ came bounding over, face flushed with excitement. "Dad, guess what?" He clambered onto Greg's lap, waving his arms like a windmill. "They're gonna fix the chess house. Can we help? Please? Please?" Greg blinked. "The chess house?" Arthur smirked. "That's what he calls the pavilion." JJ bounced like a pogo stick. "Can we, Dad? It'll be fun. We can paint stuff." Greg looked into his son's hopeful eyes and felt his resistance crumble like a stale cookie. He groaned. "Fine. One day. But if I end up covered in paint?" Arthur's grin widened. "Oh, you will." Chapter 5. First collision. Greg Jackson hated surprises. Surprises usually meant trouble. Like the time JJ decided to help with laundry and flooded the bathroom. Or when his ex-wife announced she was leaving for a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and forgot to mention it was a lifetime without him. So when Arthur called Thursday night and said, "Be at the park Saturday, noon. There's someone I want you to meet." Greg's gut tightened like a knot. Arthur was vague, which meant Arthur was up to something. And when Arthur was up to something, it usually involved Greg. Now, standing under the old oak tree, Greg adjusted his collar and tried not to look like a man about to walk into an ambush. JJ was already sprinting toward the swings, cape fluttering behind him like a pint-sized superhero. Greg envied that kind of freedom, the ability to run headlong into life without worrying about the fallout. Arthur sat at the chess table, grinning like a cat who'd swallowed a canary, and next to him Greg's breath hitched, a woman. Tall, poised, with chestnut hair pulled into a sleek ponytail and eyes the color of strong coffee. She wore jeans and a tailored blazer, like she'd stepped out of a boardroom and into a park without missing a beat. Arthur waved him over. "Greg, there you are. Meet Meagan." Meagan stood, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, her smile polite but guarded. "Arthur's told me a lot about you." Greg shook her hand, trying not to notice how warm it felt. "All lies, I hope." Her lips curved. "Depends. He said you're terrible at chess." Greg shot Arthur a look. "Really?" Arthur shrugged, utterly unrepentant. "Truth builds character." Greg chuckled, then gestured toward the pavilion behind them. "So, what's this about?" Arthur clapped his hands. "Community project. This old pavilion needs a facelift. You two are going to make it happen." Greg blinked. "You too?" Meagan crossed her arms. "Apparently, yes. Granddad thinks I need fresh air." She made air quotes, her tone dry enough to parch the Sahara. Greg smothered a grin. "And you agreed?" "I didn't agree," she said. "I surrendered." Arthur beamed. "Same thing." Greg rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I'm not exactly a DIY guy. Meagan arched a brow. Neither am I, but I can manage a project. Greg laughed softly. Figures. Her eyes narrowed. Figures. You look like someone who color codes her calendar. Meagan tilted her head, lips twitching. And you look like someone who forgets what day it is. Greg grinned. Touché. Before Meagan could reply, JJ barreled over, cape flapping. He skidded to a stop, eyes wide as saucers. Whoa, are you my new mom? Greg choked. Meagan blinked. Arthur coughed into his sleeve, suspiciously like a laugh. JJ, Greg said, voice strangled. No. She's helping us fix the pavilion. JJ frowned. Oh, Ben brightened. Can she play superheroes? Meagan crouched, meeting his gaze. Depends. Do I get a cape? JJ grinned. You can borrow mine. He whipped it off and draped it over her shoulders like a knight bestowing armor. Greg stared, something warm curling in his chest as Meagan laughed. A clear, unguarded sound that didn't match her polished exterior. For a moment, the park felt brighter. Arthur cleared his throat. Well, now that introductions are done, let's get started. Greg tore his gaze away, forcing his brain back to practical matters. But as he picked up a paintbrush and Meagan rolled up her sleeves, one thought lingered like a stubborn echo. This was going to be trouble. The good kind. Chapter 6. Forced proximity. Greg Jackson had painted himself into a corner, literally. The pavilion project was supposed to be simple. Scrape, sand, slap on a coat of paint, and call it a day. But Arthur, in his infinite wisdom, had accidentally scheduled Greg and Meagan for overlapping tasks, which meant Greg was now standing on one side of a half-painted bench while Meagan worked on the other, close enough that he could smell her shampoo. Something clean and crisp, like green apples and ambition. He tried to focus on the wood grain. Failed. Careful, Meagan said, her voice smooth as silk. You missed a spot. Greg glanced up, meeting those sharp coffee-colored eyes. I'm getting there, she smirked. Perfection takes time. Greg grinned. Spoken like someone who alphabetizes her spice rack. Meagan arched a brow. And you strike me as the type who thinks ketchup counts as a vegetable. Greg laughed, low and warm. Guilty. They worked in silence for a moment, brushes swishing, sunlight filtering through the oak leaves. JJ darted around like a pint-sized foreman, issuing orders with all the authority of a 5-year-old in a superhero cape. Dad, you're too slow, he declared, hands on hips. Miss Megan's winning. Greg shot Meagan a look. Winning, she shrugged, lips twitching. I'm competitive. Greg leaned closer, voice dropping. You know this isn't a race, right? Megan's eyes sparkled. Everything's a race. Greg chuckled, shaking his head. You're dangerous. Only if you're afraid of losing, she said. And for a second, the air between them crackled like static. Greg cleared his throat, stepping back, straight into a paint tray. White paint splashed across his boots, his jeans, and, because fate had a sense of humor, the edge of Megan's blazer. Oh no. Greg grabbed a rag, mortified. I'm so sorry. Meagan stared at the streak of paint on her sleeve, then burst out laughing. A rich, unguarded sound that made Greg's stomach flip. It's fine, she said, still laughing. Adds character. Greg groaned. Arthur's going to kill me. Meagan grinned. Relax. It's just paint. Besides, she dipped her brush and flicked a tiny dot onto his shirt. Now we're even. Greg blinked. Did you just? Yep. Her smile was pure mischief. Greg narrowed his eyes, lips curving. You realize this means war. Meagan tilted her head, daring him. Bring it. And just like that, the tension shifted, lighter, playful, electric. Greg hadn't felt this alive in years. Arthur, watching from a distance, hid his grin behind a coffee cup. His plan was working better than he'd hoped. Chapter 7. Cracks in the armor. Meagan hadn't expected the park to feel different. It wasn't the peeling paint or the half-finished pavilion that caught her off guard. It was Greg. He was kneeling by a bench, sleeves rolled up, forearms dusted with flecks of white paint. The late afternoon sun carved golden lines across his skin, and for one ridiculous second, Meagan forgot how to breathe. She shook herself and strode over, boots crunching on gravel. You missed a spot, she said, pointing to a stubborn patch near the leg. Greg glanced up, grinning. You mean the spot I was saving for you? Meagan smirked. Nice try.
I'm strictly supervisory.
Figures, Greg teased, dipping his brush again. Corporate types always delegate. She rolled her eyes but crouched anyway, grabbing a spare brush. Fine. But if I ruin my manicure, you're paying for the repair. Greg chuckled. Deal. For a while, they worked in companionable silence, the rhythmic swish of brushes blending with the distant laughter of children. JJ's voice rang out like a bell, commanding a group of kids in some elaborate game of tag. Meagan stole a glance at Greg. He was focused, steady, every movement deliberate. There was something grounding about him, like he belonged to a world that wasn't constantly spinning. You're good with him, she said softly. Greg looked up, surprised. JJ, she nodded. Most dads I know barely make time for their kids. You're different. Greg's smile was small but warm. He's my priority. Always has been. Meagan hesitated, then asked, doesn't it get lonely? Greg's brush stilled. For a moment, his jaw tightened, and Meagan wished she could snatch the question back. Sometimes, he admitted finally, but I'd rather be lonely than distracted. He deserves all of me. Meagan swallowed hard. That kind of devotion was foreign to her, a language she'd never learned. Her relationships had always been transactional. Time for attention, attention for compromise. And compromise was something she'd never mastered. She set her brush down, fingers tracing the grain of the bench. I've lost people because of my job, she said quietly. They wanted me to choose. I couldn't. Greg studied her, eyes steady and unreadable. Maybe you just haven't met someone who understands what matters to you. Meagan laughed softly, bitter at the edges. Understanding's overrated. Greg didn't argue. He just went back to painting, and somehow that silence felt heavier than words. JJ came barreling over then, cheeks flushed, hair wild. Ice cream, he declared, bouncing on his toes. Can we get ice cream now? Greg chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. You've got paint on your nose, buddy. JJ grinned. Ice cream fixes everything. Meagan laughed, the tension breaking like glass. He's not wrong. Greg looked at her, something soft flickering in his eyes. You coming? Meagan hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, why not? As they walked toward the vendor, JJ skipping ahead, Meagan felt a strange warmth settle in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something. Something that scared her more than any deadline ever could. Chapter 8. The almost date, Greg Jackson had worn a suit exactly twice in the last 3 years. Once for his brother's wedding and once for a job interview he didn't get. So when Arthur announced, you and Meagan are representing the pavilion project at the charity gala, Greg's first thought was, I'm doomed. Now, standing in front of his bathroom mirror, Greg wrestled with a tie like it was a venomous snake. JJ sat cross-legged on the counter, swinging his legs and offering helpful commentary. You're losing, JJ declared, munching on a cookie. Greg grunted, yanking the tie. I'm not losing. I'm strategizing. JJ tilted his head. Looks like losing. Greg sighed. Why are ties even a thing? Because fancy people like choking, JJ said solemnly. Greg laughed despite himself. You might be right. Later that evening, the gala was held in a ballroom that looked like it had been dipped in gold. Chandeliers glittered overhead, and waiters glided by with trays of champagne. Greg felt like a fish in a tuxedo, out of his depth and overdressed. Then he saw her. Meagan stood near the entrance, talking to a woman in a sequin dress. Her hair was swept up, exposing the elegant line of her neck. The deep green of her gown made her eyes look like polished jade. Greg's breath caught. Arthur, of course, was already working the room like a seasoned politician. When he spotted Greg, he waved him over with a grin that said, I told you so. Greg approached, trying not to trip over his own feet. Meagan turned, and for a moment, the noise of the room faded. Wow, Greg said before his brain could stop his mouth. You clean up nice. Megan's lips curved. So do you. Though. Her gaze dropped to his tie. You lost the battle. Greg groaned. Don't start. She laughed softly, and something warm flickered in Greg's chest. Arthur clapped his hands. You two look like $1,000,000. Now mingle. Make the pavilion sound like the Sistine Chapel. And with that, he vanished into the crowd. Greg and Meagan drifted toward the refreshment table, exchanging small talk about the project. But the conversation soon shifted. So, Meagan said, sipping champagne, do you hate these things as much as I do? Greg chuckled. Probably more. I keep expecting someone to ask me about stock portfolios. Meagan smirked. You'd be fine. You've got charm. Greg blinked. Charm? She shrugged. Don't let it go to your head. Greg grinned. Too late. They laughed, and for a moment it felt easy, natural. Then the music changed, slow and smooth, and couples began drifting to the dance floor. Meagan raised a brow. Dance? Greg hesitated. I don't really. Come on, she said, holding out her hand. It's just moving to music. Greg stared at her hand, then took it. Her fingers were warm, steady. He let her lead him to the floor, heart thudding like a drum. They moved awkwardly at first, then found a rhythm. Megan's perfume was subtle, something floral and clean. Greg felt the world narrow to the space between them. You're not bad, she murmured. Greg smiled. You're lying. Maybe, she said, eyes glinting. He laughed, and for a moment he forgot everything. His doubts, his fears, the weight he carried. It was just her, the music, and the possibility of something he hadn't dared hope for. Then Arthur appeared at the edge of the floor, grinning like a man who just won a bet. Greg groaned. He's enjoying this way too much. Meagan laughed. Let him. He earned it. Greg looked at her, really looked, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, Arthur was right. Chapter 9. Conflict brews. Greg Jackson had never been good at reading signals. Chessboards? Sure. Business emails? Mostly. Women? Not a chance. Which explained why, 2 days after the gala, he was pacing his living room like a man trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. The evening had been perfect, almost. Meagan laughing at his jokes, her hand warm in his during that slow dance. The way her eyes softened when she looked at him. For the first time in years, Greg had felt something stir. A spark he thought had burned out long ago. And then came the phone call. He'd stopped by the park after work, hoping to catch Arthur for a quick game. Instead, he overheard Meagan on her cell, voice clipped and urgent. "No, I can't push the deadline," she said, pacing near the pavilion. "I'll handle it. Just make sure the team stays on task." Greg froze behind the oak tree, guilt prickling like static. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her tone, sharp, commanding, hit him like a cold wave. He'd seen that tone before, heard it in late-night arguments with his ex, when work always came first and family came last. Meagan ended the call, exhaling hard. Greg stepped out before he could stop himself. "Big project?" he asked lightly. She turned, startled. "Greg. Hey." Her smile was quick, but her eyes held shadows. "Yeah, just work stuff." Greg nodded, forcing a grin. "Sounds intense." "It is." She hesitated, then added, "I'm used to it." Something in her voice, pride maybe, made Greg's stomach twist. He wanted to believe she was different, that Arthur hadn't set him up with another woman who'd choose ambition over everything else. But doubt crept in like fog. "Well," he said, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Don't let me keep you." Her brow furrowed. "Greg." Seriously. He cut in, too fast, too sharp. "You've got deadlines." "I get it." Meagan stared at him, confusion flickering across her face. "What's that supposed to mean?" Greg shook his head. "Nothing. Forget it." And before she could answer, he walked away. Heart pounding, mind spinning, the echo of her perfume trailing behind him like a ghost. Later that night, Meagan sat at her kitchen counter, laptop open, untouched glass of wine beside her. She'd replayed the conversation a dozen times, trying to figure out what went wrong. Greg had been warm, easy, funny, and then suddenly cold, like someone flipped a switch. She hated guessing games, hated not knowing where she stood. But more than that, she hated the sting in her chest, the one that whispered she cared more than she should. Her phone buzzed. A text from Arthur. "Arthur, how's my favorite granddaughter?" Meagan typed back, confused. "Arthur, about Greg?" She stared at the screen. Of course he knows. Arthur always knew. Meagan sighed, fingers flying. He pulled back. "I don't know why." Arthur's reply came fast. "Give him time. He's a good man. Just cautious." Meagan closed her eyes, frustration simmering. Cautious she could handle. But walls? Walls were harder to climb. Across town, Greg sat on the edge of his bed, staring at JJ's sleeping form. His son's small hand curled around a stuffed dinosaur, his breath soft and steady. Greg brushed a strand of hair from the boy's forehead and whispered, "I won't mess this up for you." But deep down, he wondered if he already had. Chapter 10. Arthur's Gambit. Arthur Whitmore had never faked a heart attack before, but there was a first time for everything. He sat on the park bench, watching Greg pace near the pavilion like a man carrying the weight of the world. Meagan stood a few feet away, arms crossed, her expression tight. The air between them was colder than last week's coffee, and Arthur hated it. His plan had been working, until Greg's stubborn streak kicked in. Now, if Arthur didn't intervene, two good people were going to retreat behind walls thicker than Fort Knox. He tapped his cane against the ground, thinking. Subtlety hadn't worked. Time for drama. Arthur let out a low groan, clutching his chest. "Oh dear." Greg spun around. "Arthur? You okay?" Arthur slumped against the bench, groaning louder. "Chest? Feels funny?" Meagan was at his side in seconds, kneeling, her voice sharp with panic. "Granddad, talk to me." Arthur cracked one eye open. "Maybe call an ambulance." Greg's face went white. "Hang on." He fumbled for his phone, hands shaking. Arthur closed his eyes again, fighting a grin. He wasn't proud of this, well, maybe a little, but desperate times called for desperate measures. 5 minutes later, Arthur lay stretched out on the bench, a bottle of water in one hand, JJ's toy stethoscope draped around his neck. Meagan hovered, still pale, while Greg paced like a caged tiger. "Arthur," Greg said, voice tight, "you scared the hell out of us." Arthur waved a hand weakly. "Just a little episode. Nothing serious." Meagan glared. "You need a doctor." Arthur shook his head. "What I need is peace. And for you two to stop acting like strangers." Greg froze. "What?" Arthur pushed himself upright, eyes blazing with the kind of fire that made CEOs tremble. "You think I pulled this stunt for fun? I'm 82, Greg. I don't have time for your nonsense. You like her. She likes you. Stop letting fear run the board." Meagan blinked, stunned. Granddad. Arthur jabbed a finger at her. And you're so busy proving you don't need anyone. You're forgetting what it feels like to let someone in. Silence fell heavy and raw. Greg stared at the ground, jaw tight. Megan's throat worked as she swallowed hard. Finally, Greg spoke, voice low. Arthur, I can't screw this up. Not with JJ. Megan stepped closer, her tone soft but steady. You won't, and I'm not asking you to give up being a dad. I'm asking you to let me in. Greg looked up, meeting her gaze, and for the first time the walls cracked. Something warm flickered in his eyes, fragile but real. Arthur leaned back, satisfied. Well, he muttered. That's my good deed for the decade. JJ popped up beside him, grinning. You're not sick, are you? Arthur winked. Not even a little. JJ giggled. You're sneaky. Arthur chuckled. Kid, you have no idea. Chapter 11. Checkmate. The pavilion gleamed under the soft glow of string lights, a far cry from the weathered ruin it had been weeks ago. Fresh paint, polished tables, and a chessboard centerpiece. All courtesy of Arthur's community project. Greg stood at the edge of the park, hands shoved into his pockets, watching JJ chase fireflies with a pack of giggling kids. His heart felt heavy and light all at once. Meagan was here. He could feel her before he saw her. The quiet hum of presence, the way the air seemed to shift when she walked into it. Looks good, she said behind him, voice warm and steady. Greg turned. She was in jeans and a soft sweater, hair loose around her shoulders, looking nothing like the corporate warrior he'd first met. For a moment, he forgot every word he'd rehearsed. Yeah, he managed. It does. They stood in silence, the kind that wasn't awkward but charged, like the pause before a storm breaks. Meagan glanced at JJ, her smile softening. He's happy. Greg nodded. He deserves to be. Her gaze flicked back to him. So do you. Greg swallowed hard. I'm not sure I know how anymore. Meagan stepped closer, her boots crunching on gravel. Maybe you don't have to know. Maybe you just try. Greg laughed softly, bitter at the edges. I tried once. It didn't stick. Megan's eyes held his, steady and unflinching. That wasn't love failing you. That was someone making a choice. You didn't lose because you cared. Greg stared at her, words tangled in his throat. He wanted to tell her everything. The fear, the guilt, the nights he lay awake wondering if he was enough for his son. But all that came out was, I don't want to mess this up. Megan's smile was small but sure. Then don't. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them. The laughter of children faded. The hum of traffic dimmed. It was just Greg and Megan, two people standing on the edge of something terrifying and beautiful. Greg reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Her fingers slid into his like they belonged there. You're sure? He asked, voice rough. Megan's eyes softened. I've never been more sure. And then he kissed her. It wasn't fireworks or fanfare. It was quiet, deep, the kind of kiss that felt like coming home. JJ's voice shattered the moment. Finally, he yelled, hands cupped around his mouth like a tiny cheerleader. I told you guys you liked each other. Greg broke the kiss, laughing against Megan's forehead. Kids got timing. Megan laughed too, and for the first time in years, Greg felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. Across the pavilion, Arthur watched from his chess table, a smug grin curling under his whiskers. He tipped his fedora and muttered to himself, Checkmate. Chapter 12. Saturday Ritual 2.0. The park looked different now. Not because of the new pavilion or the fresh paint, but because of what it held. Greg sat at the chess table, the same one where it all began, sunlight dappling through the oak leaves above. Across from him, Arthur adjusted his fedora with exaggerated dignity, like a king preparing for battle. You're going down today, Arthur declared, moving a pawn with theatrical flair. Greg smirked. You've been saying that for 3 years. Arthur grinned. And one of these days I'll be right. Greg chuckled, but his attention drifted to the laughter ringing out from the playground. JJ was racing across the grass, cape fluttering behind him like a tiny superhero. Megan was chasing him, mock scolding about no running near the swings. Though her laughter betrayed her, Greg's chest tightened. Not with fear this time, but with something softer, steadier. This was what peace felt like. Megan jogged over, cheeks flushed, hair tumbling loose. She dropped onto the bench beside Greg, stealing a sip from his water bottle without asking. Your son, she said, breathless, is a menace. Greg grinned. He gets it from his grandfather. Arthur snorted. Watch it, son. Megan leaned against Greg's shoulder, and he didn't even pretend to mind. Her presence fit like it had always been meant to. No grand declarations, no fireworks, just quiet certainty. JJ bounded up then, eyes shining. Dad. Megan. Guess what? Greg raised a brow. What? I beat everyone at tag. I'm the champion. He puffed out his chest, then eyed the chessboard. Are you losing again? Greg groaned. Why does everyone assume that? Arthur winked. Because you are. JJ giggled, climbing onto Greg's lap. You should move the horsey thing. Greg laughed. Knight, buddy. It's called a knight. Horsey, JJ insisted, then turned to Meagan. You want to play next? Meagan smiled. Sure. But fair warning. I'm ruthless. Arthur chuckled, eyes twinkling. That's my girl. Greg looked at her then, really looked, and felt that quiet certainty settle deeper. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was good. Better than good. As JJ wriggled off his lap and ran back to the playground, Greg reached for Megan's hand under the table. She squeezed back, her smile saying everything words couldn't. Arthur cleared his throat loudly, pretending to study the board. Well, he muttered. Looks like my work here is done. Greg laughed, shaking his head. You planned this, didn't you? Arthur's grin was pure mischief. Son, in chess and in life, it's all about the right moves. Greg squeezed Megan's hand again, heart full. For the first time in years, Saturday didn't feel like a ritual. It felt like the start of something new.